So there's three papers here. I'm not going to do any of them justice, and nor obviously am I, and I'm not going to pretend to even attempt it. What I'm interested in is the issue is, AI is upon us. We're all here for a reason. What should theorists be doing? We've learnt that basically all the recent developments in artificial intelligence are all an advance in statistics. Well, that's terrible news for economic theorists, because we already have in our models people who were able to do perfect statistics, apply statistical analysis at a frontier that we haven't even reached yet. So where would we even start to accept the idea that we've got a technology where we're below that frontier? And that's a real conundrum. So what should we be doing? So we have, what is the demand for theory here? We have a new drastic innovation. We've got no observed phenomena. We've got some past phenomena that's similar, automation. We've got nothing real. We've got some stuff going on now, and there's people even in economics are heavily involved, but we don't have nearly enough to really study. We need to predict future outcomes, for policy reasons, for anxiety reasons, for fun. And so that's where we can use theory. We can use theory to generate predictions based on the characteristics of the technology. So there's an opportunity there. The key challenge is to make sure we're asking, of course, the right questions rather than only answering answerable questions. And that is a real issue. So the three papers we see here, maybe sitting back and say it's kind of hard to work out the commonalities between them, but I have oracle-like senses, and so I'm going to present them all in a single table. And on the columns of the table is basically the theorist is a reinforcement Pavlovian animal. There's a stimulus, they have a response that leads to a research question, and then there's more stuff to be done. And broadly speaking, the three papers, and not in the order they were presented, represent looking at theories for past phenomena, current phenomena, and future phenomena. So the stimulus for the past phenomena is that Bill Gates got up one day and said we should tax the robots. This is exactly the sort of suggestion that comes from somebody who did some undergraduate and didn't complete it. Now, the response to that is we will build a model to show the thousands of ways in which this is a bad idea, which is essentially what the paper has done to many respects. To answer the research question, we're in the world of second best. We're going to set up a model where having some automation leads to some bad stuff because we're going to put in a friction somewhere. And, that gives us a hope. And then we're going to say, in the theory of the second best, we know what we can now do is open up the wealth of stupid things might actually do some good. And we're going to ask ourselves, is a robot tax one of those stupid things that can do some good? And if we try hard enough, we'll find the one instance in which that's the case. Now, that's a great exercise. It's an entirely important exercise for us to be able to evaluate policy, and that's essentially what it's done. And so the research question is there any way of correcting for the technology-induced income inequality other than what you do normally, just redistribution? And the answer is really probably not. That would have been our prize, but it really helps us in the world for somebody who've worked that through. There's more stuff that you could do. I left myself with this paper, as usual, and we all have had this here. What's the difference between a robot tax and a tariff? Might be an interesting and easy extension and might have some relevance as well. So there are more things you could do, but that paper was completely comprehensive. There are pages and pages of things. I couldn't imagine another thing being done on this topic. We're done, and hopefully we can send it to Bill Gates and he'll be quiet. Okay. Now, the stimulus in terms of the second paper in the middling row on Q learning was that oh dear, look at all these AIs, they're wonderful. Who's the first company who's going to be using this? Who's hired all this machine learning expertise? It's Amazon. What are they going to do? They're going to collude. That's what they're going to do. We've already seen some examples of algorithms being put in leading to crazy outcomes, but what if they can use AI to actually collude? Multi-product firm, how would you set prices? How would you read off Walmart's prices, etc.? That's what was motivating this. The response was a great one. Let's see if we can do it. Let's see if we can take these machine learning agents and actually get them to collude in a game. Now, I actually had a similar idea a year ago, and I asked Graham Taylor, I don't know if he's still in the room, one of his students, is this possible to do what they did? And this was literally a year ago. And top machine learning person said, no. This is too complicated, the state space is too large, the continuum of prices, this is just impossible, I don't even know where to get you started. Lo and behold, we have 3 economists who have actually done what I was told was impossible a year ago, and actually set up a game to do this. Now, in order to do this, they didn't do quite what we wanted. They crimped the rationality of the agents. These agents are 2 things. They are very limited memory going on. And secondly, they are, but this is the natural thing that you wanted out of this, it's the only learning they're going to be doing is adaptive learning. Okay, and we know from game theory, adaptive learning gets you to converge to Nash equilibrium in certain outcomes in certain circumstances, mainly due to the structure of the game, which is something we can actually look at ex ante, especially for this environment. But it's sophisticated learning, which is a whole other ball game. And moreover, we have other questions and other things going on. But this entire program is quite interesting. It's, what is the minimum computational power to get collusion? And are there interventions to prevent collusion? At the moment, their intervention is to shock people into being competitive for a period and see what that happens. But, there might be others as well. In other words, they're creating a laboratory. They're creating a laboratory. And moreover, they are finally automating the one thing we want to get rid of in experimental economics. Not the paying for students, that's going, but having to fill in ethical requirement forms to do our experiments. If you do it with machine agents, you don't have to worry about that. There is so much more that can be done here. Is this the most interesting? Of course they picked the prisoner's dilemma. Why wouldn't you pick the prisoner's dilemma? But, I'm interested in a coordination game. What's going to determine whether if you can coordinate on a good equilibrium when there are other equilibrium around to get stuck in? That's interesting. What about the game of chicken? I don't know how AI will play the game of chicken. That would be quite interesting as well. Can we use AI to resolve these theoretical challenges? Namely, we don't know how people collude. We don't have great things. We've thrown undergraduates to see if they can collude. We don't know if they're too smart or too stupid. But here, at least you can set that parameter so that we know exactly what we're getting. Maybe that'll be interesting. And the final one, Anton's one, it takes us into a much more futuristic realm, which is, the stimulus to that is that, there's arguments. And these philosophers, they argue, and they use potted economics. I'd like to say they're worse than Bill Gates in some dimensions, in terms of how they arrive at these things. And the question is, the AI, one thing that comes up, the AI can't replace humans because only humans need stuff. Basically the images of a robot saying, oh, we've got all the workers and they can't buy anything, and the robot has some existential crisis and destroys itself. So the response to that is to see, is a 100% savings economy possible? Well, that's essentially what that paper asks and it models. What are the conditions under which that occurs? And also, not surprisingly, Anton puts up, here's what the humans do in our models, here's what the robots do in our models. They kind of look the same. Of course, because the humans in our models, especially general equilibrium models, are robots, according to anyone you'd describe outside of this room. So, of course that was going to work in some sense. We've just got 2 types of robots. One that gets born exogenously and one that we actually decide to make. And we can make fashion from resources. So, you can ask interesting questions. Should the machines receive property rights? The answer is, if you care about the humans, no. But that's the same as asking when you've got a model of the capitalists and the workers, as we used to have in the old growth days. Should the workers receive property rights? No, or yes. Yeah, well, I can't remember. Anyway, one of those. And what do humans really want anyway out of all this? And these are questions that can start to be asked. And the question is, I think the broader question is really, can we do anything today to provide long-term technological insurance for humans? And thus far, that is a very hard question to work out. And reasonable people have disagreed and get worried about those things. It only takes one visit to some factory somewhere, seeing what a robot could do, to all of a sudden say, well, that's it. It only takes one moment of reflection while lecturing to a class of undergraduates, or any student for that matter, to realize that, I'm not that great at this job. I can imagine being replaced. And so, so these things do come up, but how you actually think about how we can insure ourselves today, because we know there's a time it's too late, is really hard. Climate change is kind of easy. At least we kind of know what that looks like, build a house or stop polluting. But, with this sort of stuff, who knows? Anyway, so I think there's a lot of more interesting areas for theory to go to. This little smorgasbord represents some of the ways that's going to occur, but it really is still open out there where theorists should be going, but there's a pressing need for it because we're going to need it for any forecasting. Thanks.